Today is July 13th, 2012, and we are in the home of Churchill James Campbell in Camarillo, California. We are here today to talk to Mr. Campbell about his experiences during World War II as a submariner. He served on the USS Parche, SS-384, from its commission in November 1943 until its refit in Mare Island, California, 2 weeks before the end of World War II. He was on 6 war patrols with the Parche, and he earned a Silver Star for the 2nd War Patrol. He additionally received a letter of accommodation for the 6th War Patrol. Present today are Ed Lynch, videographer, myself, Nancy Kislak. I am a member of the Conejo Valley chapter of the National Society Daughters of the American Revolution. For the record, please introduce yourself and tell us what service you were in.
My name is Churchill James Campbell, and I was in the United States Naval Reserve. I started as an ensign and wound up as a lieutenant commander. I actually went in the service on February the 1st, 1942, and out of the service in October of 1945.
You served during World War II.
Yes, ma'am.
And the name of your boat?
Well, I started out in submarines. I started on the S-48, which was built in 1921 and was SS-159. I finished up on the Parche, which was built in 1943 and was the SS-384, the 384th submarine our country had.
Where and when were you born?
I was born in Bakersfield, California, December 1st, 1916.
That makes you 95 years young.
Thank you.
Can you tell me about your parents and growing up?
My father made fishing tools for the oil industry. We traveled from one oil field boom town to another.
In California?
All over the blasted world.
Oh my goodness.
Yes, but normally in California, because at that point in history, California they were finding a lot of new oil fields.
What are fishing tools for the oil industry?
When they twist off the pipe in drilling a well or drop something into the hole, it's necessary to fish it out or drill a new hole. It's a lot cheaper to fish it out.
Now, where did you go to high school and college?
I went to high school in Los Angeles, to 2 different high schools, and I went to Fullerton High School, went to Taft High School, and came back and graduated in Taft High School. And I graduated in 1934.
In college?
Well, I went to junior college in Taft, California, because I could work part-time and I could save enough money to go on to college, and I went to University of California at Berkeley. I graduated there in 1938 in electrical engineering.
And what did you do after you graduated?
Went to work in the oil industry. I went to work in February of 1939. I started as a trainee for Standard Oil, worked as a trainee for a year in all the various departments. And on December 7th, 1941, I was working as an analyst for the Standard Oil Company in Taft. War broke out. I went down to enlist in the Navy rather than be drafted into the Army. And they told me with the education I had that I was eligible for a commission in the Naval Reserve as an ensign volunteer specialist, engineering volunteer specialist.
And where was your training?
I was a civilian one day and an ensign the next. I was not a 90-day wonder. And I reported to the Office of the Industrial Manager for the 11th Naval District in San Diego. Just didn't want to spend the war working in an office, so I learned that my father had actually worked on a few submarines during World War I. And he told me about them. I was interested, and they made a little more money. So I volunteered for submarines. And being young and eager, I just also volunteered for every course that the Navy offered. After about 3 months at San Diego, I was sent to Northwestern University in Chicago for a semester for navigation and nautical astronomy. And then on to a course at Purdue University in Lafayette, Indiana, for a course in diesel engineering and lubrication. After that, I was sent to Orange, Texas as an engineer on the LCIL number 83, landing craft infantry large. Had a crew of 21 men. The skipper was a North Carolina school teacher, and the executive officer was a Brooklyn insurance salesman. We put the LCIL into commission, went down the Sabine River to the Gulf of Mexico, on out to the Atlantic, joined a number of other landing craft, went across to the invasion of Libya and Africa. Never went ashore. It was at that point that I received orders to submarine school.
Where was that?
The submarine school in New London, Connecticut. And I was granted some leave, 30 days. Reported to submarine school and went through their psychological examinations and their physical. The only thing they could find wrong with me was I had wax in the ear. The pharmacist made scratch my eardrum while cleaning out the wax, and I couldn't make the escape from the 100-foot water tower, which was mandatory for all submarine sailors at that time. So I was assigned to temporary duty on the S-48, which was the SS-159. And there, since I was temporary and so forth, they made me assistant engineer and communication officer. The S-48 had many, many problems. It was old and had problems. It was noted for them. So I had some real good training. When the next submarine school class convened about 4 months later, I was sent to submarine school. And at submarine school, it was basically diesel, minor engineering phase of it, electrical, communications, in the primarily reading semaphore lights and so forth. And we also handled some of the old, very old OR and S boats during tactical training out in the Long Island Sound.
Now, did you venture into the Atlantic?
Long Island Sound basically is into the Atlantic, yes. During those 4 months that I was on the S-48 prior to submarine school, we actually patrolled from New York on up as far as Maine, trying to catch some of the German submarines on the surface.
Did you go from there to the Parchi?
I went from submarine school to the Parchi. I had requested a submarine that was modern, had 10 torpedo tubes, being young and eager. And, I also found that when I arrived at the Parchi, the executive officer of the Parchi had been the executive officer of the S-48 while I was aboard. I've been very fortunate on the S-48 and a couple of times able to put my finger quickly on some problems.
Can you tell me about how your name is Churchill, but in this book by Mr. Moore, your name is Jim? Tell me that story.
The first day I reported aboard the Parchi, on board the old S-48, I reported to the wardroom. The man said, "What's your name?" And I said, "Churchill Campbell, sir." His answer was just too damn long. "Find another." I said, "My middle name is James, call me Jim." And I was Jim from there on, as long as I was in the subs.
Tell me what you first did in the Parchi.
Since I had been a communication officer on the S-48, I had some training in submarine communications and then also the charts for the East Coast. So that I became the communication officer. The communication officer, particularly during the first patrol of a submarine, is kind of a critical position. Since submarines were classified as major men of war, carried the same identification as a battleship. We received a lot of the higher classified communications, not a lot, and they came in various different codes. So a little experience helped a lot in decoding.
Who was your skipper?
My skipper at that time was Lawson P. Ramage. He had already made a couple of war patrols on the Trout and had earned a Navy Cross. So he was kind of God to all the rest of us on board.
What was he like?
He was a big man, red-headed, very definite about his actions and everything else. I learned later that his vision wasn't too good because of problems in his youth. And he made all of the officers, as they reported aboard the Parchi, go through 3 days and nights of binocular training. He ultimately was looking for somebody with extra good vision, and particularly night vision.
Did he find his man?
Somehow I wound up with very good night vision and reasonable day vision. And so I wound up, as every time we made a surface approach or attack, I wound up as the target bearing transmitter operator on the bridge of the submarine.
Explain what that means.
Well, the target bearing transmitter was nothing more than a pair of binoculars mounted on a gimbal. And when the operator of the unit pushed the button, that bearing of the target was sent directly to the torpedo director control in the conning tower. And it was also my job, at the request of the commanding officer, to check on the angle of the bow if he was distracted from that point at any time. Having made, early on in the war, the submarine commanders had been trained during peacetime to be ultra safe. And we weren't sinking that many ships. Captain Ramage, being aggressive as he was, had in his mind, I'm sure, even at that time, decided that if he could approach a convoy in the dark, on the surface, he could inflict more damage and get out of there a lot faster.
The Apache made 6 runs,
Yes?
and is recognized as one of the most highly decorated submarines in the Pacific Fleet.
Well, Captain Ramage had a Navy Cross before he ever came there. While aboard there, he earned one Navy Cross and one Presidential Unit, one Congressional Medal of Honor. When McCrory took over on the 4th Patrol, when Ramage was relieved, McCrory having been the executive officer for the first 3 runs.
He was with you the whole time in the Apache.
Yes. And also happened to be on board S-48 with me all the time.
So you knew him well.
You become quite well acquainted in a submarine. The crew is 74 men. The Apache was 311 feet 8¼ inches long, about as long as a football field from goal post to goal post. The living quarters and the machinery and everything were contained in a 19-foot hull, 19 foot in diameter at the maximum. She carried a crew of 74 men and 8 officers.
What was it like to live on one, and how long were your war runs?
The shortest patrol we ever made was 46 days, and the longest we were given credit for in the 89 days, but we were only able to spend one night alongside of a tender in Inuitok, and then back out to patrol. So I will always say we were 108 days at sea on that run.
Would you like to tell me about your 6 patrols? I know the 2nd and the 5th were when you earned your Silver Stars.
Well, the first patrol, we learned that war is a lot different from what they teach you in peacetime and in submarine school and so forth. And the tactics, everything are different. Nothing ever quite works out the way somebody planned it to work. But Ramage, obviously, even in the first patrol, was committed to making nighttime surface attacks in that submarine. During the first patrol, we actually sank 2 ships from surface attacks. And during those 2 attacks, we never had to take a depth charge. We were only shot at a few times. Yeah, we made, and submarines at that time carried a 3-inch deck gun and a couple of 20-millimeter guns for battle surfacing. The 3-inch gun primarily to fight off aircraft attacks. Basically, it was useless. We did sink several sampans. One of them, a little larger sampan of the island of Wake on the way out to patrol in the South China Sea. After the first patrol, we came back to Midway Island for 2 weeks of refit, which were then followed by 3 days and nights of very intensive training. Since we had to transfer, we theoretically were supposed to transfer a third of the crew and a third of the officers after every war patrol. So we had some new people on board that had to be trained, and we were all learning as we went along.
They transfer them because?
Maybe they were subject to seasickness. Maybe the claustrophobia got them. Maybe they just didn't fit in. 74 men in that kind of restricted space, 80, well, and you're hot bunking a lot of times.
What's that?
One man gets out of the bunk and the next man gets in. Space is very limited, to say the least. You're in very close contact. If you're not sleeping in, well, it was just darn close contact.
Well, how did you eat?
Normally, you eat your main meal at midnight, since that's the only time you have any fresh air, really. You come up to surface at night and charge your batteries, and you dive every morning, basically at dawn, stay submerged so the aircraft can't find you. Yeah, once in a while they get you when you first come up or first go down. Sometimes they were pretty good at night. They're nighttime flying too.
How many submarines were there in the Pacific Fleet?
Well, I'm not positive on the Pacific Fleet how many at any time, but weren't very many. I think the total submarines we had, including training boats, new boats that hadn't got out there yet, and the rest of it, we had about 65, maximum 65 to 70 submarines in commission at any one time during World War II.
I think I read that 52 submarines were lost.
Yes.
Would that be correct?
That is correct. 52 submarines were lost during World War II. We've lost a couple since. The actual deaths to submarine people, fatalities, were higher in the submarine fleet than they were in the Marine Corps, percentage-wise.
What can you tell me about the second run? The Parchee's second run is a very famous run.
Yeah, we went out. Actually, we had been in a wolf pack during the first patrol. I don't recall the names of the two boats there, but the second was also a wolf pack with 3 boats. It was Steelhead, the Hammerhead, and the Parchee. The wolf pack commander was Captain Peterson, and he sailed aboard the Parchee. a very senior captain. The Wolfpack commanders were normally a very senior captain or a very young admiral. However, on board a ship, there's no doubt about who's in command of that ship. The captain is in command and his word is law. The Wolfpack commander directed the actions of the Wolfpack, but he did not command that vessel or give a direct order ever. Captain Ramage made that very clear to start with, and it helped. We were on the patrol for about, just over 30 days in patrol area in the South China Sea. We rendezvoused with the Steelhead and Hammerhead. The Hammerhead reported engine problems and requested permission to return to base for overhaul. Captain Peterson requested from ComSubPac to continue the patrol in the area since we had made no contacts. Well, we had contacted one carrier, but we never got into a firing position on him at all. About 3 or 4 days later, after that meeting, the Steelhead made contact with a very large convoy. All we got on the report was very large, and they gave us a course and speed. After about 3 hours of trying to make contact, we were only about 30 miles apart. We had made no contact. So we broke radio silence and requested new course and speed from the Steelhead, which she gave us. So we changed course and went all ahead flank. By this time it was getting quite dark. Night had come on. We'd been on this course not too long, maybe an hour or so. We picked up one escort who was headed almost directly at us. We avoided him, and then we could hear depth charges up ahead of us quite a ways. Sound picked them up. We did not hear them audibly on the bridge. Captain remained on the surface, and very shortly after that, after avoiding the one escort, we saw a number of ships all headed directly at us. The other escorts of the convoy had apparently gone up and were working and depth charging the Steelhead after her initial submerged contact or attack on the convoy. The first ship that we encountered was a small freighter. The setup to the torpedo derrick control was very fast. We fired 3 torpedoes and missed when he changed course radically. We then pulled right on past him, fired 2 torpedoes from the stern tube, and he disintegrated rapidly. The captain then picked out a large tanker for the second attack. We went in, fired 3 torpedoes, again pretty fast in order to get the shots in. We made one hit. The tanker caught on fire, but it did not sink. So at this point, the captain picked out a second tanker, another large one. This time we fired our 3 torpedoes for 2 hits. You fire 3 torpedoes, you normally fire from a range of, Captain Ramage always wanted to fire at a range of 1,000 yards or less. It takes 412 yards to arm a torpedo. You can only fire them at about 8 seconds apart, simply because of the explosions could transfer back to you. That tanker took 2 hits, went down rapidly. By this time, the first tanker was getting underway pretty well, still burning. Went in, we fired 2 torpedoes at it and sank it. By this time, the convoys, many of the ships in the convoy had fired star shells, and the scene was as bright as day.
They do that to illuminate.
They wanted to see what was going on, I'm sure. Or maybe they were trying to save survivors or whatever, I don't know. That's their problem. Anyhow, it was very bright. They were manning a lot of different guns. People were firing at us from all different directions.
And you're still on the surface?
We're still on the surface. We remained on the surface all the way. By this time, one of the larger ships in the convoy was passing in very good position for another torpedo attack, so the captain just came to all stop. We fired our torpedoes, and we got hits. But by this time, the escorts for the convoy had returned back to look after their brood, and one of them was obviously trying to ram us, which happened to be my job to find that sort of thing. And the captain twice ordered right full rubber to avoid the contact. However, during the confusion and the other attacks, he'd forgotten we were at all stop. I more or less reluctantly reminded him we were at all stop. He immediately ordered all ahead flank, and then followed up by "give me all you've got." 3,200 3,200 horsepower against 2 hard-over propellers, rudders. That submarine turned on a dime, faster than, thank gosh. I know the patrol report said the escort missed it by 90 yards. If it was 90 inches, I would be amazed. We'd fired quite a few torpedoes by that time, and reloading torpedoes on the surface while maneuvering at high speeds is extremely hazardous. However, one of the torpedo officer by the name of Frank Alcorn had really trained the torpedomen to reload under basically that kind of condition, and had actually developed some gadgets for helping it. Well, they were all shooting at us at this time, and that escort, when he tried to ram us, came very, very close. We started to pull clear in order to reload torpedoes under a little more favorable conditions and get out of some of the gunfire. We had actually passed by several of the ships in the convoy close enough under their stern that they could not depress their big deck guns to get to us.
Could you hear them speaking?
We could hear them talking, and we could hear the orders, the guns above us, on several occasions. When the escort passed us, trying to ram us, we definitely exchanged a few courtesies with them.
So you spoke to one another?
Not directly.
Now, this technique, is this something that he developed, fighting on the surface in a submarine?
Well, nobody else had ever tried it in history as far as submarine warfare went. And many of the peacetime skippers of the submarines were actually relieved early on in the war because they weren't considered to be aggressive enough. And that's why I think Captain Ramage, in his mind, developed this, how he wanted to do it on the surface. As we pulled clear that night, very shortly we came nose to nose with a very, very large transport. It was the biggest ship I'd ever seen. It happened very rapidly. The captain very quickly fired 3 torpedoes down the throat, right straight at his bow. He fired 1 just on either side slightly, in case the transport changed course. We then pulled clear to our about 600 to 700 yards, fired 2 torpedoes at the beam of the transport, and she went down rapidly. We were only given credit for half on sinking that transport because the steelhead had apparently struck her with 1 torpedo ahead during their submerged attack.
Captain Ramage earned
His Congressional Medal of Honor for that, basically that patrol, definitely that patrol. And he had earned his second Navy Cross for the first war patrol. So that the Parchee herself was awarded the Presidential Unit Citation for the first 2 runs.
You think this is in recognition of?
The ship sunk, in my mind, a lot of it to Captain Ramage for the development of the night surface attack technique. It obviously was different. Gosh knows it was aggressive. During that attack, having been on the target bearing transmitter and stayed with it where you wouldn't dare get off of it once you had pushed the button saying that you were on it. You never got off of it till after the torpedoes were fired, and I had seen at least 5 torpedoes hit ships that night, all within about 1,000 yards of my binoculars. The small arms fire was getting quite thick by the middle of the attack. Some of the bigger guns were starting to open up, but weren't bothering us at all. At one point along the way, when I was looking at the escort that was trying to ram us, I had left the target bearing transmitter momentarily and had used my regular conventional binoculars, and they were shot out of my hands.
But you weren't injured.
Gosh, no, never even got a scratch so I could get a Purple Heart. I'm just born lucky.
Now you earned a Silver Star.
We asked,
War run.
mostly, I guess, because my night vision was pretty good. That's the only reason I was up there. There's not a heck of a lot of choice once you get into that position.
Now, do you have a picture of yourself?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, listen. Well, after the 4th War Patrol, after the 4th War Patrol, we came back to Pearl Harbor, it was after the 2nd War Patrol. Yeah, it was after the 2nd War Patrol. We came back to Pearl Harbor for a refit at Pearl Harbor. Once again, two weeks of refit, during which period the entire crew of the ship, of the boat, was housed at the Royal Hawaiian Hotel. And all of the officers, practically all of the officers, almost every day reported to the boat and to check the repairs that were going on to their department. The difference, we were getting a 4-inch gun, deck gun, and to replace the 3-inch. The engines were having to get no major overhaul, but certainly checked out thoroughly. Something you can't do at sea. Also, there were many tests on the batteries A submarine is powered submerged. During World War II, the submarines were powered submerged by 2 batteries. Each battery consisted of 126 cells, and each cell weighed 1,750 pounds dry. That's 252 cells with a lot of weight. We had a top submerged speed of 8 3/4 knots. We could maintain that speed for about 40 minutes. Or we could go at a speed of about 2 knots for about, I know the book said 40 hours. I don't know who ever stayed down that long. After 20 hours, there weren't half the crew that could operate anyhow. Particularly after a depth charging where you were spending a lot of energy to damage control and the rest of it. Our top speed on the surface was 21 knots. On occasion, I've been known to push that just a little. After the patrol, we got back to Pearl Harbor, and that's when I received the Silver Star. And
Is that a picture of it there?
well,
The one back there?
yeah, the one, that's a picture of the Silver Star itself.
And this is for the Second War Run.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's for the Second War Run. And I was trained by the Admiral. And that is Admiral Lockwood. He was the total hero of all submarine sailors, particularly in the Pacific.
Why?
Early on in the war, there were many, many torpedo failures. We would shoot a torpedo, you'd see it hit the ship, and it wouldn't explode. They always accused the skippers and so forth of missing. Actually, they didn't. They kept getting closer and closer, and they could see them hit and everything else. And Admiral Christie, who was had charge of the submarines out of Australia, would not believe that the magnetic detonators for the torpedoes were anything but perfect. He'd been with the Bureau of Ordnance prior to going to Australia. Admiral Lockwood disagreed with him. There was apparently some undercurrents rather high up, and Lockwood went temporarily back to Washington, D.C., but then came out as the head of submarine in the Pacific. He started, the first thing he did was check out the torpedoes for depth control. We found that they were running as much as 10 to 12 feet deeper than 7. Then, when we began to get that, they found that the magnetic detectors, the Japanese were degouging their ships. The magnetic detonators would not trigger half the time. And then we began to see that some torpedoes go at night, but we could see torpedoes hit and still not go off. They then actually dropped a couple of torpedoes, and in inspecting what prop they had, they learned that the firing pins were actually bending. The actual firing pin for the torpedoes was bending on impact. That was changed, and we began to get 99% detonations.
I can understand why he was a hero. So, can you tell me about the third run? And what your position was at that point on the boat?
Well, after the third patrol, Captain Ramage was still in command, and since he had been recognized by Roosevelt definitely as to receive the Congressional Medal of Honor, we were assigned kind of a not so dangerous a patrol. We became a lifeguard situation for the flyboys actually bombing Japan. A very frustrating business. They knew they were going down. They were doing all they could do to keep the darn thing in the air, and probably most of them were injured anyhow. So we didn't actually pick up anybody, but we did after that patrol. During the patrol, we actually took 2 flyers on board from another submarine that was going out and we were going in. So that was the long patrol. We then headed back to Midway Island and went through our 2 weeks of refit. After that third patrol, Captain Ramage was relieved of command and Captain McCrory took over.
Why do you think he was relieved?
No strain. Nobody was supposed to make more than 3 successive war patrols.
You made 6.
Well, I know you're supposed to transfer the crew and those buddies, but you got rid of the jokers or somebody that didn't quite fit in.
But they kept you on.
I probably had more mechanical and electrical experience than anybody else they could find. And having helped McCrory out on the old S-48 on a couple of occasions, he thought maybe I could fix it. So I was stayed on board. Also, I had had more experience than anybody they could find on decoding some of the messages. And by this time we were getting the ultras, which is even just that beyond the top secret. And they were always transmitted with strip decoding, which is a slow process, and the captain always wanted the results immediately. So that became a very priority business when we received an ultra message.
Can you tell me about your 4th run?
About what?
The 4th run.
Well, after the 3rd run, during our 3 days of operation off Midway, we actually, on the last day they send out a target vessel for us to shoot a practice torpedo at, which has an air warhead on it instead of a regular warhead, and surfaced at the end of its run. The flyboys would pick it up and take it back for overhaul. It was getting to be dawn. We were just about ready to dive. I had the bridge, spotted the target. As was routine, I called for the captain of the bridge, but nobody ever showed up. We actually, at that time, we had both the squadron commander and the division commander on board the Parche, who were training us. Still nobody showed up. So I started the approach on the normal procedure, sent the crew to battle stations. Still nobody showed up. Torpedoes are expensive. Very expensive. We can only carry 221. Here we had a practice torpedo on board. Sometimes they were lost. Heck, I've never fired a torpedo, actually fired it and set everything up, so forth. But we got in firing position and nobody showed up in the conning tower. So I just made ready to bow to and fired the practice torpedo. About that time, sound man, who was sitting right over next to the periscope, reported loud approaching screws on the starboard quarter. I swung the periscope, put it in low power, and my gosh, there's the escort almost in good firing position for a stern tube. We didn't have any tubes in the stern tubes at all, any torpedoes in the stern tubes. So I had them prepare a water slug and fire a practice water slug. Good practice for the torpedo man anyhow. About that time, the captain, one of the senior officers, showed up in the conning tower. The captain says, "Okay, I relieve you." And I figured I was really in trouble. But apparently that night on board when we came in, I was called over to the division commander's office, questioned, which is not uncommon, just to see how things are going on board and so forth. So, but that was when I later learned that I had qualified for command. I was 27 years old, and I think that was one of the real proud moments of my life.
So they set that situation up? Or they just observed how you
They were just
performed?
observing how I do. Was I going to panic, or what was I going to do? How would I handle it?
Do you have any pictures that you would like
Yeah,
to show?
after McCrory took over at the end of the third run, this was a picture of our crew. 74 men and 8 officers.
Can you point yourself up?
Well, yeah. Let's see. Yeah, I'm right there.
Very good.
Yeah. Max Borton, Irwin, Chief. Incidentally, this is a picture of the Parchie coming in into Pearl Harbor after the 4th War Patrol. I think it's the best picture that ever happened to the Parchie. That's the way she was, that's the way we were. Every man on that crew were mighty proud of it.
Can you tell me about the 4th run?
Well, the 4th run, McCrory had took over as captain, been the executive officer for the first 3 runs. Richard Wright came on board as the executive officer. We actually left Pearl Harbor, and there's all submarines at that time that were going offshore Japan or into the South China Seas or in that area. Went through Midway, by Midway, in order to refuel and take on enough food. It took us about 3 days and nights to get from Pearl to Midway. The Battle of Midway had not yet happened at that time. But there was absolutely nothing on board on Midway Island except goony birds and warm beer. We took on, went on out to patrol. On that patrol, by that patrol, we already had the 5-inch gun on board. We only carried the 4-inch gun for just, I think, 2 runs. And they had the 5-inch gun on board as a deck gun. We had also had 40-millimeter guns, 2 of them. As we passed Wake Island, all the boats that went from Midway on out toward Japan passed close aboard Midway Island in order to observe what was going on and if any activity out unusual from the Japs. We did pick up one fairly good-sized boat had a lot of obvious radio gear on her off Midway, off Wake. Went to battle surface and sank her. One that stands out in my mind we closed in after the boat sank. There was a lot of floating debris. We were looking for a survivor, maybe for information. We passed close aboard a darn wooden bucket. All of a sudden, the man threw the bucket off of the top of his head, had been treading water, started firing at us. Well, the 50 caliber deck guns on the sub eliminated all the survivors in an awful hurry. It just totally brought home the fact that war is really hell. And we then went on. We made that patrol along the northern shores of Honshu, with Japan, main island, and on up into off Hokkaido, going as far north as Paramushiro. Once we had passed the straits between Hokkaido and Honshu, we began to see a lot of Russian ships, and we had to be extremely careful that we didn't shoot them. So it was very touchy. The weather was extremely cold. You're pretty far north. We picked up a beautiful ship, only maybe 350 feet long. Beautiful ship, almost looked like a yacht, cruising along. Started the battle surface on her, but the 5-inch deck gun wouldn't fire. We later found out it had just been frozen up with ice. As we were pulling clear, there wasn't a lot else we could do. I requested permission to clear the 40-millimeter gun, clear the ammunition out of her. They fired one round from the 40-millimeter gun, and that ship totally disintegrated in the most violent explosion I've ever known. Boy, it even shook the submarine to the part where people below thought we'd been hit. Don't know what he was carrying or anything else, but that's all it took on that one. The next contact we made, which was almost disastrous, the fogs were pretty bad. The weather was bad. We couldn't get into approach where we could make a reasonable attack. Tracked her for one afternoon, all night. Fog, never got a look at her to positively identify. About noon the next day, the fog kind of lifted and we got a look at her. Just as we were about ready to shoot, we were getting in position, and there's a big red cross on her side. She was carrying a Jap flag, but thank God we didn't fire. There had been one or two incidences where Red Cross ships had been sunk accidentally.
And those skippers were very shortly out of the submarine service. We didn't find much shipping in that, even into Sugarakaiko, which is the straits between. So we were headed down along the coast of Japan, patrolling in quite close. As we hit the harbor, passed by the harbor of Nazco, we spotted two large ships in the harbor. We passed close enough to the harbor entrance, we got a look at the fortifications, any submarine deterrents at the harbor entrance. Pulled real clear that night, put on a white, very complete battery charge. Went into the harbor next morning, submerged, approached the first closest ship, fired 3 torpedoes at her, reversed course, fired 3 torpedoes at the second ship, surfaced, and went out of there on the surface. I was the engineer at that point, and I guarantee those governors were held to the last ounce. I don't know what the log ever read, but I'm sure it exceeded our 21 knots. So we got credit for, since the water was shallow, and apparently these ships were being repaired at that time in that harbor. We only got credit for damaging those two, but since we'd made the harbor entrance and had mapped it as we went, that was considered rather good too.
So you mapped the harbor.
Pardon?
You were able to map the harbor.
Well, we plotted the depth as we went in. We knew that, and we knew basically how we had to get in. We knew the courses. Yes, we had a pretty good depth from where we fired the torpedoes. So we had a pretty good look at the harbor. I'm sure that interested, if they'd ever had to make that final invasion of Japan, that would have been critical information. We went on later on in the patrol. We sank another ship, freighter, not too large as I remember. After the patrol, we went on back to Midway for our overhaul, watched the Goonie birds, drank warm beer for another 2 weeks. And that is the picture of the crew. Oh, here it is. Yeah, this was the crew after the third run, and I showed you my picture there. Mm-hmm. Yeah. After the fourth run, Richard Wright, the executive officer, was relieved, sent home for leave. I took over as executive officer for the 5th and 6th runs.
So you were on all 6 of these war runs.
Yeah.
And who were the 2 other people that were also the only people that were on all 6?
Well, Captain McCrory made all 6 runs, and so did our baker, Bob Hall. And he's the man that has kind of kept the crew of the Parchie together for all these years. Not too many of us left now.
How can you be a baker on a submarine? Can you explain that and what food was like on the submarine?
Well, this guy was good. We had cakes, we had pies, and every morning that I can remember we had cinnamon rolls. I don't know when he did it all, but I never questioned him. And you probably don't realize it, but the baker or the cook, or even the mess cook, that is in the galley at the time of a dive is critical to the safety of that submarine. That is the final manual valve that shuts the main induction, which lets the air to the main engines. If that flooded, you went right on down, forever. Yes, we had the hydraulics and so forth, but that was the final move that guaranteed it. And so we picked those guys pretty carefully.
What was food like on the submarine?
It was always very good until we made our first attack and then got depth charged. You naturally went run silent, run deep, and and silent running, everything shuts down. Normally you don't wear any clothes except your drawers, and they don't have any buttons or snaps on them.
Why is that?
Strictly noise. When you're doing damage control from the depth charges, you're going to make some noise. And every morning, that boat had a depth rating of 412 feet, but we would dive to about 500 feet in order to take a bathythermograph, which is the temperature of the water as you went down. We were looking basically for two things: a thermal layer in the ocean, either hot or cold. A change in temperature changed the sound waves of the pinging that the Japs were doing on us, so they could not get a very accurate position on us. And the second thing we were looking for was a bed of shrimp.
Why?
Shrimp make an awful noise. In fact, I still feel guilty when I eat a shrimp.
So the submarine could hide in the different temperatures or in the bed of shrimp?
A submarine is like an airplane. You can't stop. If you stopped, you either went up or you went down. It's like flying in the water is what it amounts to. We had to keep moving. And basically when we were running silent, we turned only 40 turns on the screws. Both screws would turn at 40 RPM. Everything was quiet. All the orders were actually given over sound-powered phones, except in extreme emergencies, so that there was no sound.
What did you think of the movie Silent Running?
It was a good movie, it just wasn't very real. Now, the movie I really thought was very accurate and portrayed life as it really existed on a dang submarine with Das Boot, the German picture of the German submarine.
You were talking about what happened to the food when you had to run silent.
Okay. The food spoiled when we had to run silent. The humidity and all the refrigeration, all the air conditioning, everything, and with all those batteries and the hot diesel engines and everything inside that submarine in very, very close space, it got hot in a hurry. And I mean very hot. And your food spoiled. Everything spoiled. After that, we ate a lot of rice and beans.
War Patrol,
Yes,
when you became the executive officer,
yes.
and how many ships did you sink during that War Patrol?
I would give us credit for whether that yacht would be considered a ship or not. I don't know. I don't know how they ever ranked it. But we actually definitely damaged the two in Nazco, in the harbor of Nazco, and sank one out beyond that. And then after that patrol, we returned once again to Midway Island. I figured that's when I got the second Silver Star, and I figured it had to be for actually. At that point, the executive officer is also the navigator. Navigation on a submarine is a little difficult in that we were still, at that time, we had to do the star sights and then the calculations. and plot everything. We actually made the entry and exit of Nosco safely. And I sweat blood during that period. And I figured that's why they gave me another Silver Star. But
They call it a gold star in
all right,
lieu of a
in lieu of the second Silver Star.
Right. Now, the 6th War Patrol, can you tell me about that one?
Yeah. We have the 5-inch gun and the 40-millimeter deck guns. Big ships are becoming very, very hard to find. We've sunk an awful lot of them through the preceding several years. The Japanese are definitely carrying a great deal of their shipping and so forth on the sampans, and the sampans were beginning to, instead of being isolated one and one here and there, were becoming small convoys of them. And maybe one of the extra large sampans would carry a larger gun. It was during that run we were making a battle surface on a convoy of 7 or 8 sampans. Had not yet got in range for our 5-inch gun when one of the sampans opened up with a pretty good sized gun. The shell actually penetrated our deck and creased the main induction. If that shell had come a half-inch lower, they would have definitely punctured the main induction, which feeds the air to the main engines, and we would have been sunk. We would have been unable to dive, and that would have been the end of us. So, and at the end of the 4th patrol, there's one thing that should be brought out. The submarine carried 118,000 gallons of diesel fuel when it started on patrol. Every patrol, it took about 10 gallons of diesel fuel per mile, nautical mile, of navigation. To carry that much fuel, we converted 2 of the main ballast tanks for the submarine into fuel tanks. And as we utilized that fuel, that diesel fuel was replaced by the salt water. So there was a lot of weight, actually, in the submarine when those fuel was utilized and gone. To ever make it back, since we had already covered from 11,000 to 12,000 miles on the patrol, to make it back to Midway at all, we had to convert those fuel tanks, the converted fuel tanks, back to ballast tanks, so we wouldn't use so much fuel. And even then, when we got back to Midway, you were barely on the fumes. That is one of the 2 operations where, I don't know how other submarines operated, but that's a dirty, nasty, stinking job and very dangerous. That and going down the file of dress a knot or something off the propellers, or shifting those tanks back to ballast tanks, were the only time that the captain ever gave anybody any of our 2-ounce bottles of depth charge brandy, which was just old overholt rye whiskey. On that 4th patrol, normally the ballast tanks were converted by the engineer officer and 2 of his better hands. That night we had an ultra message come in, and the captain was, as always, was impatient to get it, and I was told to decode it and to send up the assistant engineer officer. As they were just finishing up the conversion and going back to the cigarette deck to go back below, we were hit by a rogue wave, and all 3 men and their tools and everything were washed overboard. Since we'd been on more patrol, there certainly wasn't any searchlights or anything up. It took us second or two to get searchlights up. It's night. Yes, we did bring the searchlights up. We spotted one man. Of course, you didn't know who he was or anything else. And we did make the approach and rescued him. And he was the assistant engineer officer because he was an ex-coal miner and a whale of a good swimmer. The other two men were never seen again. Leffler and Van Epper, two very good men. Yeah. So the 4th Patrol was a toughie. And it said, ultimately it said a lot about Captain McCrory. Those men were just reported lost. But after the war, he actually made a personal trip back to both families and told them the whole thing. He was a real good man. In that 5th run, yeah, the 6th run we were up to, yeah, we got creased in the main induction with that shell. We sank 5 or 6 sampans, I don't recall exactly how many. Not in that battle, but in other battles. Finally, we spotted a 3-ship convoy very, very close to the shores of Japan. I would guess that they were well within 1.5 miles to 2 miles of the shore of Japan, in shallow water. We went right inside the 100-fathom curve. That convoy was carrying a lot of flags, which showed some importance. They had a number of escorts. The captain made a submerged approach, passing directly under one of the escorts. Why we were never detected, I'll never know. Once we were inside the escort screen, we came up to periscope depth, fed some very fast information because this convoy was moving rapidly. And we fired at the second ship. We fired three torpedoes at the second ship, 3 torpedoes at the second, 2 torpedoes at the third ship. By this time, the periscope had been up quite a while. The escort, those were steam torpedoes. The escorts just followed the steam path right down to where we expired, and the depth charges started to come. We were in shallow water. They worked on us for a long period of time. I actually counted 70 depth charges before I lost track. And when you can hear the detonator of a depth charge inside that submarine, you better hold on to something because you're sure going to get shaken. McCrory being a smart man, the escorts naturally trained in anti-submarine warfare, figured the submarine would try to get to deeper water. So he went in shallow. Very shallow. We then began to, from there, they lost track of us for a little bit. We began to work out to some of the deeper water. By this time, we'd been down almost 20 hours. There weren't over half the crew that could move, just due to lack of oxygen. And those that were walking weren't thinking very clearly. And so the captain decided that we'd battle surface, go down fighting anyhow. We surfaced from way deeper than we normally did, without any look. We actually came up in a rain squall, and there was not another escort in sight. Believe me, we started a battery charge and pushed that thing out of there in a hurry. That's known as, that good old naval maneuver known as getting the hell out of there. Yeah. The captain on that patrol really earned his Navy Cross. So,
And from there you went to,
well, from there, after the 6th Patrol, we came back to Pearl Harbor. As we normally came back to Pearl Harbor, yes, we had to come back by Midway. Fuel, got some fresh food, on to Pearl Harbor. The boats returning from patrol at Pearl Harbor normally went down the Sound Range. We started down the Sound Range and they just said, that's deep enough. You're going back to the States for overhaul.
so that's where they test the submarine?
Just tested for the noise you're making. Theoretically, you're running as quiet as you can. Apparently, we were making some pretty good noises.
And that was from the depth charging?
A little more than somewhat. Actually, after we surfaced that night, we had a lot of rattles. We cut some of the superstructure loose and sank it. That didn't hurt us a lot. And then we actually tried to make an attack on a big freighter coming out of Sagara, but we were still a long, long ways away and out of torpedo range when the freighter turned directly away from us and the escorts headed directly at us. So we broke off that attack and actually then it went back to Pearl. And after that Sound Range test, they just told us we were going back to Mare Island for overhaul.
In California?
In California, San Francisco Bay. And as we just outside the Golden Gate, when I first went into submarines, they were paying us at $1 a dive. Or at least they kept records of it. Ultimately, they went to the 50% bonus pay, just like the flyboys. Since I'd started that when I was still on the old S-boat, the yeoman had kept it up for me. And just before we went under the Golden Gate, I had made 1,407 dives. We unloaded our torpedoes at Hunter's Point, went on up to, my memory slips me, but we unloaded where they had the only mutiny in the United States Navy. Went to the ammunition depot and unloaded our ammunition, came back to Mare Island, and then started the overhaul. The captain, once we got that, the captain took off immediately for Washington, D.C. to be debriefed, and I became the senior officer during the overhaul. The full crew, by the time the senior petty officers and so forth had left their boat, about 10 days after we'd been in Mare Island, I took leave. I hitchhiked back to Taft, California, where my wife was.
And what was her name?
My first wife's name was Alma. Yeah.
How long were you married?
We were married for 53 years. She put up with me for a long time.
So you started a new life with Alma, and where did you go and what did you do?
Well, I went back to Taft where they tried to make me a desk-type engineer. And it wasn't my thing.
Well, it must have been a huge adjustment to go from being a submariner to an oilman.
Well, I had the diesel and electrical experience in the submarine, and plus the trainee as Standard Oil. I very shortly after they tried to make me an engineer, I became the power engineer. During that interim, the chief engineer of Standard Oil came up that he wanted a break for the oil well drilling drawworks, which is a major piece of equipment for drilling an oil well. They were utilizing a hydraulic brake. He thought they could develop an electric brake that would be more efficient and a lot less and a lot cheaper, since there wouldn't be the wear. Naturally, a new piece of equipment had some problems. As an electrical engineer at Cal, I had specialized in electrical machine design. And so I had some ideas on that, how we might improve some of the characteristics. Or this is the electrical, and this is the mechanical. They were just starting this program. You sit for a couple of days for each of these examinations.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think you'll ever find very many people registered in California in both an electrical and mechanical engineer.
Right.
I'm kind of proud of that one.
You got a lot of things to be proud of, sir.
Well, while I was an engineer for Standard Oil there in Taft, they started the registration for professional engineers in the state of California. And since I graduated as an electrical engineer, I took that examination first. Since I had done the diesel engineering at Purdue University for the Navy and had a little more than somewhat diesel operation experience, I also took the professional engineer's exam in the state of California for the mechanical engineering. And the fact that I actually am a registered professional engineer in the state of California for both electrical and mechanical engineering, I'm kind of proud of that fact.
Congratulations.
Yeah, my first child was born while I was taking the final exam at submarine school. Since they wouldn't let me leave the base during final exams, she had the baby born over in the hospital in New London, Connecticut. Then she was with me, and he was with me while I went to Portsmouth, New Hampshire on the Parchie, and she stayed in Portsmouth while we operated for a couple of weeks with the Limeys up in the North Atlantic. When I got back in, I was in for about 48 hours before we headed south and out to the Pacific. She headed back to California. Then when I arrived in Taft after the war, so forth, I went back to work for Standard Oil. And about a year and a half later, my daughter was born. My son has since died at the age of 67. My daughter's living in Charleston, South Carolina. And
You have grandchildren?
Well, my son had 2 children, my grandchildren. My daughter had 1, and then she adopted 2 Korean children. The boy that she adopted has since died, and the girl is got involved with the CIA in Panama, and married another CIA man, and they're living in Maine. And they have a couple of children. So, and my grandson, Mike Criminy, I'm very, very proud of. He went through nuclear training, was trying to get in submarines too. But since he did well in school, the larger nuclear plants were on the bigger ships, so he was actually wound up as a chief, going up for chief on a cruiser in the nuclear plant. After 6 years, he was going up for chief. He told me he was getting out. I told him he was crazy. As of about 6 months ago, he became the manager of the Nucor steel plant in Logan, Utah, at just over $300,000 a year plus bonus. Shows how smart I am.
You worked for Richfield from 1951 to
Well,
1980, is that correct?
From 46 until 51, I traveled all over the darn world with the firm of Gribben and Baylor as their serviceman on the electric brakes for the drilling rigs. I became very familiar with all the types of rigging and equipment on drilling rigs, their power systems and the rest of it. And since this time electric brake would develop a 6,000 horsepower braking and could be controlled almost instantly from 0 to the maximum. They became rather popular, but they were unfamiliar with the drillers, so I traveled over a great deal of the world just training drillers to use it and servicing them. I got home one night, and my wife told me I'd been home 12 nights in that year. So I went down in 1951 and quit. Gave up my part of the firm of Gribben and Baylor. Since I've been involved with a lot of mathematics, I had done well with the firm of Gribben and Taylor. We had kept our office in the monkey farm at Hollywood, where the monkey farm had been. And we did that so that we could utilize the moat around the monkey island for mud. And they did experimental work to vibrate the drill collars of a drilling well at resonant frequency and combine that with the rotary drilling. I actually did some calculations on that with the man, the inventor of Albo-Dean, who had been the inventor of the single-line hydraulic system for aircraft on the propellers. I'd done a lot of work for Richfield, and when I left the firm of Gribben and Baylor, they asked me to go over and be interviewed by one of their vice presidents, which I did. He took me up to see Mr. Jones, then the president of Richfield. He wanted me to kind of look after his interests since he was going to invest in the percussion and rotary drilling combination. I told him I didn't trust Albo-Dean because he owed me some money still, so I was escorted out of there in a hurry. Then I went back to Taft, no job, no nothing. The next morning, the vice president from Richfield said, well, you won't work for Jones, how about working for me? I've got a job in Bakersfield. So I went to work for Richfield, and after about a month or two of training, looking around the company and become familiar with it, another engineer by the name of Dave Kofall and myself were told to design a rig, drilling rig, which we did. It was the first drilling rig in which I ever knew that utilized torque converters for the drilling operation. They wanted that rig to be highly portable and utilize a minimum of welders during a normal move. They wanted to be able to move down the road for 40 miles, set up in 24 hours, something that had never been done before. Worked out pretty well. I ultimately became a superintendent I started out as a mechanical superintendent, then a mechanical and electrical superintendent, then maintenance superintendent, then maintenance and construction superintendent. And finally, by this time, they discovered Prudhoe Bay. Richfield had actually hit it. They had drilled about 5 or 6 wells up there. They knew they had one whale of an oil field. And they had started to sell off the California production so that they could pay for the financing of the Prudhoe Bay.
In Alaska.
In Alaska, in the Arctic Circle. From from 1969 until 1974, I was in Alaska several times. In 1974, I moved up permanently as a production services superintendent, basically in charge of maintenance and construction at Prudhoe Bay. We were actually beginning, in 74 we had gotten permission for the 48-inch Trans-Alaska pipeline. On June the 17th of 1977, we started production out of Prudhoe Bay, down the Trans-Alaska pipeline. And that production averaged 1.7 million barrels a day until we had shipped 11 billion barrels of oil from Prudhoe. Today it's down to about 600 barrels a day. So I went home one night from Prudhoe Bay. It was Saturday. Took my wife to the doctor. He told me she had lung cancer. I had to get her out of there fast. I went down Monday morning and quit. And they told me, no, go back to Bakersfield, we'll find something for you. So I became an environmentalist for Richfield Oil Company in California for 6 months and then retired. Since then, my wife died and I did a lot of consulting while she was in the hospitals and so forth.
I'm sorry for your loss.
And that's it. Then she died and I married Mary.
Now you remarried. You married
Yeah,
Mary.
I remarried a
And
lady.
the two of you
Well,
made something very special in the Pearl
Well-
Harbor Museum. Can you tell us about it?
yeah, this picture of Mary, old Campbell, but she thought that a person that came back from the war should probably be remembered as well as somebody that died in the war. So she actually did a lot of research and came with the names and number of patrols that each man had made on the Parche. It wound up that 191 people had served on the Parche during her 6 war patrols. She had a plaque made, donated it to the Submarine Museum at Pearl Harbor. And we went over there and took a number of relatives for a week. We had a ball.
Can you tell me about the museum?
And that's at the museum, and the Parche had gone through both atomic bomb tests at Inuitok, once while submerged and once while surfaced. She was in pretty bad shape. So the conning tower is in the museum and has been restored totally and has actually been used in many, many submarine movies. The bridge and fairwater of the Parche was completely redone with lead-free paint this time and put as the centerpiece in the memorial park at the submarine base at Pearl Harbor. Yeah, if you go there, you can still see the number 384 on her side.
And the binoculars?
Yeah. I don't know what ever happened to them. I just totally forget the binoculars. Yeah. So that's about my life.
Thank you for your service.
Yeah, the Navy was very good to me. It was a tremendous benefit. Yeah, being in the service isn't all beer and skittles, but it's been a wonderful learning thing for a lot of men and women.
How do you think it changed you, your experience being a submariner, and how it impacted your life?
Oh, it changes the fundamental way you think. You cease to be panicked anymore. You hadn't better be. And sometimes in the oil industry, there were many, many times when maybe you should have been panicked. But keeping your cool kind of helps.
Have you maintained a relationship with any of the...
Well, there's a submarine veterans organization in Ventura County. I joined right after World War II. Even though I didn't live here, I would get here when I could. Then the submarine veterans of World War II recently disbanded, and the submarine and was integrated into the Submarine Veterans Incorporated. And the Ventura County base of the submarine base veterans in Ventura County is called the Apache SS-384 base.
Can you show me the picture of the Apache?
And this was an artist's conception, and this was my plaque. When I parked, I had to park up at Mare Island. I got a parking space. And this was actually an artist's conception of the Apache with some of her armament, and it's not badly done. And this is the battle flag that we had. The submarine insignia, the 5 stars indicating the 5 successful war patrols we made. This flag represents the presidential citation, and this, if you notice, we were not supposed to be able to put the name of the submarine on our battle flag. But if you look, P, Arch, E. That is the Arch of Triumph, the Shield of Honor, and the scroll par excellence, none better.
This book, Battle Surface by Stephen Moore, details the Apache's battles and war patrols, and I understand from looking at the book and from talking to you that you participated in the information in this book. You gave 4 telephone interviews in 2009 and exchanged numerous emails with Mr. Moore. And in looking through it myself, I see that your name, your story, or your photo is on 79 pages of that book.
Well, sometimes I live the darn thing, and sometimes I get wound up and talk too much about it.
Thank you for everything that you shared with us today.